Camilla, welcome to the pod. How are you and where are you?
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm at home. I'm in London, in Wandsworth. It's nice to see your face, and thank you for having me on.
Likewise, congratulations on your little one.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can't believe that probably last time I saw you was actually a more decent amount of time away than it feels like, but life has changed a little bit
I
since I
think
saw
so.
you.
I don't think it was a year ago, but it's probably not that far off it. It's
Yeah,
definitely like 8, 9 months, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
interesting.
life's good. Life's very different, but all good. So thank you.
So the topic of our conversation is, are fractional CMOs the best of both worlds? Whether
Mm.
we get to answer that question in full within 35 minutes, I'm not sure. However,
I
I
give you a
usually like to
short
start.
answer. Yes.
Yeah. There we go. Podcast over. But I usually like to do a little bit of a rewind, and I'd like to do a little bit of a primer. So for the uninitiated,
Yeah.
how would you describe a fractional CMO?
Um, to me, that's a really easy way to describe it. It's exactly the same as a CMO. I just don't work full time for anyone. So I do it in a part time capacity for a number of brands. You'll find some of my peers do it for a number of brands, some do it for one brand, and then do sort of more consulting advisory on the side of it. But you effectively function, as I said, as a CMO in part time capacity. And you'll find it often when they're brands that aren't ready to be able to invest in that role full time.
That's a good marker. And I'm curious then, why did you decide to leave kind of the more structured
Yeah.
brand world in
Yeah.
favor of doing your own thing? What were kind of the key triggers?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it happened when I went through redundancy in the brand that I've been working in. And it gave me that opportunity to try something I always wanted to try, which is working for myself. I think we all have that itch, and there's always in the back of everyone's mind. And what does that flexibility look like? But for me, it was about flexibility of type of work and variety of work, less so on flexible that I wanted to work from home or I didn't want to work full time. The irony is I've worked more in the last year and a half of doing this on my own than I have in any full-time role. And that says a lot based on the full-time roles I've had and the scaling businesses I've been in. But yeah, my background's half agency, half in-house. I really miss some of those agency days, but I also, in the agency days, I never felt fully connected into the brands that give me the drive and the exhilaration that being in a brand does. And so being able to do a fractional CMO role has allowed me to have that ability to do more than one project at once and more than one brand at different life cycles in different sectors, but also feel like I'm still in-house in terms of the ways of working. And I felt really passionately as well. I meet so many incredible founders. Often, most of my work's with female founders, but why should they have to forego having some senior support just because they're not ready to invest in that role full time? And I've watched many businesses perhaps make wrong decisions because they've had a more junior, experienced team to be able to take them through certain stages of their business. And certainly, I mean, when I mentioned I was becoming a fractional CMO a year and a half ago to a lot of peers, a lot of people's question was, what is that? And no one really knew what it was. It was really a
Yep.
fancy way of saying I'm freelance, but instead
Yep.
of doing specific projects, I tend to come in more of supporting on a sort of almost like a staff basis. Um, but even in the last year and a half, I mean, you can't go onto LinkedIn right now without seeing someone talking about the world of fractional support. And I think we've all realized that you don't have to be full time to be able to be efficient and impactful.
Totally. I want to unpack so much of what you've just said there. So yeah, my understanding is from talking to people that have been brand side is that's one of the downsides of the brand is you in the brand, you don't get a lot of variety. A lot of it is like kind of like project driven. So if you're working on the ecom, right, you re-platform from one big platform to another, or you do some massive campaign or whatever, and then it sort of becomes a bit samey. So hence the transition and transitory nature of going from brands to brands. So that makes loads of sense. And I, as being someone who's also fractional, yeah, my thing is like they kind of want all of you, but they only get a bit. So the idea is the ROI, you get higher ROI because
Right.
in hiring people like you and I is quite expensive full time, right? So you get
Right.
a fraction of them, and you get quite a lot of like output for that money. But I have some ideas, but I'm curious from your perspective. Do you think there are downsides to the fractional model?
Um, so downsides, I think a fractional CMO done badly comes with downsides. I know that's like a sort of flippant way of looking at it, but I think that the only downsides I can see is, and it slightly depends on how you set up the relationship with the client. So a downside could be that you aren't immersed in company culture, and you don't know the business inside out, and even the team you're working with, you don't know them day by day, hour by hour. Now, in every project I do, I invest a huge amount of time getting to know the team, getting to know the business, so that every decision I both make, both cultural implications and or strategic implications, fit pretty well into the business. But there could definitely be a downside where you bring in someone and they just don't have that relationship and or tenure of knowledge with the brand to be impactful. But again, going back to my agency days, an agency, if you can't stack it and be impactful immediately, then, and even in full-time role, you have probation periods, of course, but if I took a CMO role and I wasn't making impact within week 1, week 2, CEOs are going to question my role already. So I don't really see it as anything dissimilar. You could argue that not being available 24/7 is a downside for some businesses, or when the time's right. But then it comes down to ways of working. So, for example, I only work with clients where I split my time across a week. So they effectively feel like I'm there every day. And the reality is, if they ever put a red flag up and said, help, emergency, problem, like I can drop most things to pivot quite quickly onto something if it needs it. But, some people in the fractional world are much stricter, like Monday's my day with X client, Tuesday's my other day. And I think communication can be another downside, again, of ways of working. You're not in the office, you're often remote, again, going back to that culture piece. But for me, communication is everything. My background is communications. So that's what I spent the first 10 years of my life solely doing. And therefore, I think that sets me up to being impactful at what I can do in that respect. But so, yeah, those are the only downsides I personally can see. But I think it's all about how you manage it, if anyone was worried about bringing someone in like that.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of that is like, and it gets back to the agency model. It's like about fit, right? So if it's the right fit and expectations are there, and like you said, if you hire a dud fractional anyone, it's probably not going to work. So assuming that it's good and a good person like yourself, then it's probably going to work out. I find also, I don't know about your experience, that certain tasks suit fractional work as opposed to others, right? So in my world, I don't do fractional sales because I just don't think you can turn sales on and off, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do? You say, oh, yeah, this is a great deal. I'll see you next Tuesday. Like, that just ain't going to fly, right? So, in your world, are there certain elements that you think favor sort of that more fractional sort of like work? Or is there can it be quite fractional? Doesn't really matter what you're doing.
I think it can be quite broad, but I'll give you an example. So even in some of the roles I've had where I've effectively, as I said, functioned fully as a CMO, the reality is I can't steer the team minute by minute, hour by hour, nor do I think anyone should be in terms of micromanagement of that. So even in those roles, I've agreed with founder and or CEO, depending on the structure, that certain bits of the business run without my involvement. Because the reality is you could pull me in everything, but the reality is I can't then get everything done that you want me to do. And also, more importantly, the team can't be bottlenecked just because I'm not working at that said moment. So that would be the only type of work I think you've got to be a little bit careful on. But it comes back to fit, as you said, in chemistry. So I had a few people reach out to me last year who, in an amazing and flattering way, said, Camilla, I'd love to bring you on for 6 months or X amount, long-term project. And I actually said, could we start with a project? We talked about what was on their mind and challenges. And we started with a 6-week sprint project for all of those, which allowed us to test the chemistry, allowed, them to see the work that I could develop. But then more importantly, meant, are we set up for success as a pairing for long term? So again, I'm not suggesting you have to work like that for every fractional relationship and sort of date before you get married as such. But for me, it's, I only have my reputation to go on right now.
Yep.
And I would hate to get myself into a project which is 6-8 months down the line and realize that I'm not the right person for them, and mutually, and and both ways, that they're not right for me. And when you work for yourself, you need something to to get you out of bed in the morning and feel inspired. You have to really love what you do, more than I think even in a permanent world where you can sometimes hide if you're having an off day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it speaks to I suppose, the services model that fractional people offer, right? Like, and with most services models, it favors, from a forecasting financial perspective, retainer, right? Because it's easy to forecast and you can extrapolate it out, and it's a good way to run services. But I think it fails to take into account the realities of what you've talked about, which is kind of like the relationship undulation, right? Like sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not so good. You know what I mean? And by building in, I think some of those short term, like an initial engagement to make sure that the fit is there, because you can never really. You can go by the recommendations on the chemistry, right? Like somebody introduce you and you know the brand and they're great, but until you get like on the road with them, right, it's really hard to know, right? You really need to understand how do they work,
Yeah.
how chaotic are things behind the scenes, because everything usually looks rosy
But
on the
even,
outside. You know what I mean?
even me, I would be a brilliant CMO to some businesses and I'd be a terrible CMO for some businesses. Doesn't mean I'm any less good at what I do. Just there's some stages, type of working, structure, personalities, chemistry, everything where you need a really unique fit. And that's one of the hardest bits, I think, of everyone worries about going at it alone to make sure you've got enough pipeline of work.
Mm.
But if you then narrow it down further by saying it's not only a pipeline of work that in theory I could do, but it then becomes work that Camilla, will be brilliant at, and they would love me. That starts to be where you get the challenges.
So some of the other stuff that you do is kind of more on the mentoring and coaching side. And the way I look at it is, I'd love to get your take, but I
Yeah.
assume that that type of skill set works very nicely with a fractional CMO. But do you find that it is a bit separate, or like how do you think about consulting? Is it a mixture of mentoring and coaching as well, or does it depend on the scenario and the engagement and the type of
Yeah, it does.
person, team?
Yeah, I mean, I call myself a mentor, but full disclosure, I'm not trained as a mentor in any capacity or a coach.
I don't think many are.
I mean, there are some incredible people I know who create, their business is coaching, and therefore I would
Yeah,
hate
sure,
to step on
sure.
toes and, the uneducated over here. So the reason I started doing a lot of that was, well, first of all, when I was in full-time role, I was mentoring and coaching some younger female marketeers who were looking to, have other people. Mentors and coaches are incredibly important to me, and therefore I think they should be incredibly important to other people. And I've kept that up because the one fear I had, again, going it alone, was to not have a team. And not because I didn't want a team, not because I want a team to delegate work to, but I really like coaching, like being with people and developing people is one of the things that I love the most. And I've lost that to a degree by going at it alone. Now, obviously, in some of the engagements I've got with clients, I'm very much mentoring their team and steering their team. So I kept that up. And then secondary to that, a lot of the work I do, which is more advisory work, sometimes that effectively is mentoring and coaching for CEOs or founders. Again, I can't coach or mentor them on every single topic, but we have a relationship where we effectively mentor one another, or they come to me for questions and discussions, which is not my wheelhouse. It's not topics that I'm a deep expert on, but we discuss them and we find solutions and we have an intelligent conversation about it. But certainly the younger marketeer world is where I feel most passionate about helping right now, because I just don't think there's enough very tangible ways to learn. There's amazing programs you can go on and qualifications you can do.
Yeah.
But I learn everything through doing. And if you're in certain businesses, you don't get enough of exposure to learn multiple ways of doing things or multiple situations. And some of my best friends these days, I count as my mentors as well, who are ex-colleagues, employees, peers.
Well, that's a good segue then, based on that experience that you talk about there. Like, what do you think makes a good CMO in 2024? And how does that compare to when you sort of started this game like 15 years ago?
Yeah.
Or is it the same? Like, it could
Yeah,
be more like the
I was gonna say it's gonna be
fundamentals.
controversial, but maybe it's not controversial to say I don't think they're hugely different, other than the type of marketing is changing so fast. The world of marketing, the different verticals, out of home advertising in theory stays the same, but the pricing, the way you buy it, the integration with digital and on demand, all of that's changing. Likewise, in the world of social media, it's changing daily. But otherwise, I think the actual more soft skills, everything from data-driven decision-making to customer-centric focus, that agility, that leadership, team management, you name it, those skills haven't changed over the years. I think it's, so I think it's more about the stack of marketing levers you've got to pull is changing. But to what I said earlier in answer to one of your other questions, I do think again, this is going to sound really obvious, but in finding the right CMO for you as a business, that's the critical unlock.
Mm,
Because let's take my peer group of CMOs. You've got ones that have come up through traditional big brands. You've got some that come up through smaller brands. You've
hmm.
had some come through more of a digital lens, or someone like me who's come from more of an advocacy comms background. And one will not be right for the other. So I think it's about knowing what your business prioritizes right now, and more importantly, how's the headroom going to be delivered. If the headroom is going to be delivered by huge big brand media campaigns, ad campaigns, I'm not your girl. If it's going to be driven by building a community and winning in social and building that advocacy, that's going to be more of a natural fit for me. So I think,
Yeah, nice. And do you see across verticals that that's quite apparent? So my sense is that some of the stuff that you just talked about there probably favors a luxury brand as opposed to somebody that has a low price point, high volume that's running through Amazon. Or is that a bit of a fallacy?
I think it could be. I'm going to sort of cop out of that question by saying it's a combination. Again, I think it really depends on. I think even within each, like every sector, you have some trends, but you've also got stuff that's completely different and contradicts one another.
So my sense is you work with a bit of an array of types of clients,
Yeah.
and of course, all clients are created equal, and they are amazing. I understand that as being somebody who works with clients. But I'm curious, like, do you find over the years, or at the moment, do you find that you work better with founders or C-suite and different stages of business? Has that changed? Like, where do you think that your biggest value is? You've kind of talked about the sort of work, but I'm curious about
Yeah,
maybe
the
some of those
type
other
of
points, like the
setup.
type of business and the stage at which they are at.
So I love the variety still, and that combination. I think there's always something very infectious about a founder-led business, and a lot of my experience is founder-led businesses, and so I tend to find myself more at home in those environments. I think the passion and energy is infectious, and when you have someone, I'm a big believer in a democratic way of running a business, and the input from multiple people on leadership, right down to every junior member. The best idea can come from anywhere, but it does help when you've got a vision and sort of one person who's really driving what that brand is to them. Because you could have a commercial CEO who's driving a business, but ultimately, for me, brand building has to be about the commercial nature of it, but also what business and brand are you trying to develop? What do you wanting to offer to people? Which you then is your job to then make it as commercial as possible and to grow as much as possible. That being said, I've done lots of briefs where I work directly with businesses which are not founder led, and or I don't have a relationship with the founder in some of my briefs, and that doesn't make any difference. But my perfect world right now is to have a client at pre-seed as well as a seed level, Series A, B, and
Nice. Yep.
beyond, and
Yep.
I want it
Yep.
all at once.
Yep. Yep.
Because I could take on 3 clients right now. They're all at Series B and they're all in the same industry. Health and beauty is my background. It could be I take a hair brand, a skincare brand, a makeup brand.
Yep.
The reality is it's the same levers I'm going to be pulling for each of those to a degree at each stage of their business. So for me, the ability to stretch my brain and have that variety, I want to be doing slightly different things.
I suppose also it must be really valuable from the client's perspective when you've got that breadth of stage company experience, right? Because the ones at Series B, you can impart knowledge to the pre-seed saying, hey, here's some things you need to look out for. I know the
Yeah,
trajectory of where this
exactly,
is
exactly.
going.
And I get, actually going back to my mentoring, I get a lot of questions from people who are at university level and or not university, but looking at their first job or looking at their first job to second job, saying to me, what do you think about in-house versus agency? This is particularly in the comms world, which was how I got into marketing. And each journey has its own merits, but if I was to define someone's journey for them without knowing them, I would always say go agency first because of that
Mm.
variety and how much you learn. In the first 6 years of my career, I'd worked on 40 brands.
Yep.
Now, had I gone deep on 40 brands? Of course not. Had I been exposed to the problems and workings of every brand within that portfolio? Absolutely not. But I got a small sense of different ways of working in a huge variety of businesses at hugely different stages. that I can lean on right now as and when I need, depending on what problem I face. Otherwise, I think you can become a little bit typecast or had, experience at one stage and one stage only. That being said, I talk to a lot of peers in the industry as well as founders who are going through a stage where they need to slightly change their team structure because the type of skills that are now needed are different to what they needed a year ago. And that can be a challenging, problem to swallow if you are in a business, but it might be that I'm brilliant from going from 0 to 1, and I'm not going to be the right person to take them from 1 to 100.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I totally agree. A couple of things. Do you think, though, you are more powerful in your role now having done both? So would you advise people to start agency, but then ultimately you should go in-house? Because my sense is, having been only agency side, that there was always this kind of idea that we thought, oh, let's hire people from brand because brands will kind of not respect you, but they'll be like, oh, you were on my side at one point, and you really do inherently understand them. Now, I don't know, is that a fallacy, or do you think, would you advise people go agency first, but then you should go in-house at a brand because you just get a much deeper knowledge of how that sort of business works, which is ultimately a manufacturing business as opposed to like a
Totally.
services business?
Yeah, I think maybe the answer instead is about just exposing yourself to lots of different ways of working. Like, I don't think you have to work for lots of different businesses to understand how they work. I think it's how do you be curious and read about other brands and expose yourself to other people who work in different businesses and learn from them. I think if you're not willing to be inquisitive and learn in that regard, then you do need the variety. What I then see is a lot of people jumping around roles very quickly, and I don't.
Yeah.
My career is an interesting one. I've had 2 very long stints at 2 businesses, and then I've had some shorter stints. One of my shorter stints at Benefit, which was about a year and a month, when I left to go to Charlotte Tilbury and I was headhunted there, I actually probably learned the most in that 1 year than I had in many roles. So, time doesn't mean everything, but I think you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't jump around to get that exposure too much.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I've always, there was that. I think it's a slightly more traditional view now because I felt the idea. I only learned it recently of a portfolio career, or the idea that you've got a lot of experience and that's a good thing. But there is definitely something when you're looking at a CV and there's only been 2 or 3 months at a number of companies that
Yeah.
doesn't look great. There's
No,
something going on
again,
there.
it comes back to what is it they're doing? Because I could break down what I do right now into that, 2 months here, 3 months there, and it looks like I'm jumping around, but that's the nature of what I do.
Yeah, that's a fraction of, exactly. Yeah. But if you're full time doing 2 months,
Totally,
3
yeah,
months, that's a
exactly.
little strange. It's
But then
probably
saying
not the
that,
companies.
I've hired a lot of people into brands where I felt very strongly that I needed to hire someone who had brand experience already. So it doesn't always mean that, I remember trying to get someone to take a chance on me to go in-house. That wasn't the most straightforward answer because they wanted, on the whole, people that knew how to run and operate in an in-house business already.
Yeah, and that's totally a common thing. Similar to when people brand side coming to agency, there's maybe a little bit of hesitation because they haven't. I always found it as an interesting concept, right? Like I always, whenever I talk to people that were on the brand world, they looked at the agency world as this kind of like grass is greener on the side. They're like, oh my god, you get to work on all these projects, and it's amazing because I'm not working on the same thing every day. And I'm like, yes. However, most services businesses are really chaotic. And like you need to understand the realities of what this is going to be like. The other thing I just wanted to touch on as you were describing that kind of experience, you said that there were certain skill sets you think are kind of changing or they're not as relevant in brands anymore. Can you sort of double click on that? Like what, and is that technology or replacing people, or is it just the way in which the world is moving? You mentioned something about the roles the roles in brands are changing, or the the things that people are doing are potentially changing.
I think what I was referring to was a CMO for today. How does that differ from the CMO of past? And it was just about more the new types of marketing that are coming into the mix. That I think the actual soft skills and that you to be a CMO to be successful are the same, but in terms of am I an expert on TikTok versus am I an expert on Facebook? And I've not kept up with the times and TikTok's moved on. I think that's kind of where I see the changes being. And that's, that applies to every type of vertical marketing. There's new technology, there's new platforms, there's new ways of doing things. So, you could very quickly be left behind. You could be a very seasoned marketeer, CEO, COO, CFO, whatever it might be. But if you're not, if you're not embracing the new ways of doing things and the new technologies and the new channels, then, you're just not going to be, you're going to be left behind.
I'm going to make a point that we do not discuss. Very related to that particular line there is AI, but we're going to leave that for the moment. I just feel like it's sucked up too much oxygen. I want to talk trends. So I get the sense that, and I just heard some information about LVMH that has totally disregarded this thesis that luxury performs well in bull and bear markets, right? Like rich people have always got money, right? And so, however, the stats I just heard about LVMH was that they were doing some sort of comparison from Netflix and LVMH, and the kind of stock prices were inverted, and the markets, or whoever the analyst was suggesting that a recession is coming because people are going to be staying at home and they're not going to be spending as much on luxury goods. But then it was slightly more nuanced because I think it was just a China impact. Basically, China economy is going down, therefore that's going to really impact companies like LVMH. However, I do get the sense that people that sit in the middle is kind of where you might be a bit more. It might be a bit more challenging for a brand. You're not luxury and you're not value. You're sort of more. Sorry, not value, but you're not economical, shall we say. Are there any verticals, or what do you think of that, and are there any particular verticals that you're bullish of? I know your experience is in kind of beauty and so forth. What do you think about those?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing, as you said, the spending power is still often there, regardless of those periods of economic trouble. I think that the biggest piece right now is you have to, as a brand, really give a reason for people to purchase you, and you have to show up with the best product and the best marketing to cut through. So what I think we will see in the next year is an amalgamation of brands. I think we'll see a closure of a lot more brands. I think we'll see brands that just couldn't cut it. And some of those might have succeeded 5 years ago, a few years ago. But often I think it'll be brands that perhaps weren't ever going to succeed big time, and they perhaps will, make decisions quicker than they might have in the past. Particularly with the brands that aren't invested in at a stage that's hugely developed right now. Path to profitability is so much more important these days, that how can those businesses get there quicker? And it might be that they are willing to take a smaller growth trajectory in order to get there if they can get to their profitability quicker. But yeah, as you said, my background's beauty and health and well-being, and that market tends to always be pretty dominant in a time of economic trouble. You only need to look at the lipstick effect during world wars. Sales of lipsticks went up after World War.
What's the
Because it's
thinking
a
behind that?
small bit of enjoyment and self-care and love.
Interesting.
And now I'm saying, are you going to go out and buy a £10,000 handbag? No, but can I invest in a £25 lipstick that makes me feel great?
Yeah, interesting.
Those categories continue. I mean, the overall beauty market isn't growing at the speed that it could have grown, but you'll still see hair, fragrance, body in particular are categories that are just really quite aggressive for the next 12 months.
Yeah, interesting. And would you, because I don't know if this is a new category, but I've definitely seen stuff about it, and it's not a new thing, but affordable luxury, is that kind of what you're talking about? And I suppose in the kind of CPG space, that's interesting because, like you said, a sort of not incredibly expensive handbag is still, that would be maybe hard to justify, whereas a nice ESOP package is still expensive, but it's not crazy expensive, if you know what I mean.
And people, but I do think every brand, even if you're a mass brand, you deserve to give people a brilliant product, and you can give them the best product you can at the margins you're working with to be able to sell it at the price you're selling it at. So I think it's where people just demanding more of that. I think what's also interesting, if you look at spending patterns, is you've got, we used to always talk about 7 touch points in marketing before someone made a purchase. In some respect, people are now doing even more than that, 15, 20, the amount of research they're doing. You also have a huge amount of impulse spending. Look at the world of TikTok Shop and the way people shop there. I mean, yes, I'm a new mum, so I'm probably, a sucker for some of the marketing. The amount of stuff I bought at 3 a.m. that I definitely didn't think I need, and all of a sudden need in about 30 seconds of one piece of content is remarkable.
Yeah, nice.
And then and don't remember what it is when it arrives the next morning at the speed from Amazon or TikTok Shop, whatever it might be. But then people are also very considered in their purchase. But I also think people are my overall sense of trends of the ways people shop. People are very fickle right now with brands. There's not that loyalty like there used to be. So you've got to work so much harder as a brand to keep that person loyal and that repeat buying and going into other categories.
I don't like it's a whole other topic, but just
Yeah.
on that, because I'm really, really interested in it. I think brand loyalty is such an interesting concept. And my general take is some brands have this assumption that you build a loyalty program and that is somehow going to magically foster loyalty. And I disagree. I think for certain things, loyalty is either there or it's not, and you got to foster it through the product and the marketing, or mainly the product, really. Like, that's my take. What do you think, though? Like, quick TLDR on loyalty.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think as well, you could create the most incredible loyalty scheme, but if no one comes to it, no one engages in it, then, it might be that, and this is where I think a lot of brands that I work with in the early stage are sort of panic and worry about them not having this huge customer base and how do they build loyalty. You can build loyalty with 10 people.
Yeah, yeah,
If you get, it's old fashioned word of mouth marketing. If you
yeah.
get those 10 people loving your brand and saying the right things, they can tell 10 people and that trickle effect. But you certainly need to decide how you manage that loyalty, depending on where you're at in a business and what type of product. Don't get sucked into doing something just because others are doing it. As I said, you can spend millions on something that frankly doesn't even create loyalty.
Yeah, I suppose there's like different sorts of loyalty. There's like the inherent core loyalty, and that is somebody that like comes back and buys your thing because they love it and they tell their mates about it, right? That's kind of what you want. And then there's the kind of like, well, let's incentivize them to do that. And I suppose that's kind of the cherry on top, right? Like if you can do both, great, but ultimately you want the former.
Yeah,
That's
and you're
kind of
always
what I
going
think
to
of.
get 80% of your sales from the 20% most engaged
Yeah,
loyal customers. But, I look at myself as a customer, and the brands I'm most loyal to, ironically, I'm actually a nightmare to their marketing teams because I don't want to be on their emails. I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
browsing
yeah,
their
yeah, yeah,
website now and
yeah,
again.
yeah,
I know them, I love them, I know what I like, and I
yeah,
shop them regularly.
yeah.
But and actually, some of those brands I love the most have almost off put me by the marketing at times. It's just, and then on the reverse, you can be marketed to so many times and never quite go and push the button on something, and then all of a sudden I speak to someone who says something great about it and I'm like, I've been looking for
I
an
need
excuse.
it. I need that
Excuse to
thing.
do it, and then I'm a lifetime customer after that point.
It's so interesting you say that. Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I'm also an equally like very weird customer. Like I'm highly loyal to the point where if I buy something, I'll buy multiple versions of the same thing in different colors. So I only wear Levi's 501s. They're the only pants I wear, and I've got 5 of them. I only wear these type of Nike
Yeah,
jumpers,
you sound
heavy
like
set ones.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very man thing to do, boy thing to do. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, and like to be honest, all of the marketing that they do, they're just wasting their money on me, right? And the kind of some of the marketing kind of sucks. It's just like, yeah, it's really interesting seeing it
It
from
goes back to
that
like
perspective.
product has to be
Yeah,
important, and I think that I spoke at an event last week about social commerce, and you can have the most wicked marketing team create the most brilliant campaigns, but if that product doesn't deliver when you get it
yeah,
home and you use it, it doesn't matter what you're developing. And I mean that no matter, even if you're a mass brand at a very cheap price point, you can still have a brilliant product for what the perceived value is of that product.
totally. Yeah, and then I mean that's physical, that's digital products, right? It doesn't really matter. Like if
Yeah.
the user experience, the thing is good, then that is great. I'm gonna park that conversation because that
Oh,
is so
that's
interesting, and I want to get you back on, and we'll talk about it
crowds.
then. Final question: where is Camilla in 3 years' time?
That's such a good question. I actually asked my husband that in prep for this. He was like, "I want you to be very happy," but it's true. I think I what am I looking for? So in the context of this conversation, the world of fractional has allowed me to is allowing me already. I'm 3 months, my son's 3 months old, and I'm already working again, but I'm loving what I'm doing and I'm not resenting it. I I I'd like to think I'm a great mum, but I also want to be a great employee, marketeer, and I want to continue that. And in 3 years' time, what that looks like, I'm trying to not be too fixed on what does my business look like right now? What is the offering of it? I think I want to slightly ebb and flow depending on how the world of marketing changes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so feeling fulfilled and all of that piece is important to me. But yeah, more of the same, probably.
I think that's a great way to end the podcast. I might also suggest we will answer the question: are fractional CMOs the best of both worlds? And based on that answer you gave, I think they are, right. Like
I
you've
think
got total freedom.
so from an individual perspective, it is for many people, but it won't be right for everyone. And I do want to make that a lot of people message me daily to say, well, I'm thinking of doing fractional. Is it for me? Would I like it? It's just like anything. And I know I've been on both sides of the fence on probably most questions you've asked me today, but I'm just such a believer that you're also individual and every business is so individual. So for me, it is the best of both worlds. And for my clients, I believe it's the best of both worlds. But do I think everyone should jump ship and leave all their permanent roles? I mean, one, if we all jump ship, then there'd be probably no work for any of us anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want too much supply.
So yeah. No, I'm joking. But if you're someone that loves the hustle, loves the networking, is confident enough to put yourself out there and to stand for something, who wants to hustle and work hard, wants to gets out of bed for the variety of work and that inspiration and who you surround themselves with, then it's perfect. If the idea of selling yourself to someone is your worst nightmare, and connecting with your network and getting yourself out there is your worst nightmare, you'd absolutely hate it. So it's for me, Camilla, right now, and hopefully in 3 years' time, this is where I'm at.
Sage advice. Camilla, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.